Good morning. Few months ago, I think it was in sometime in November, I bought Jasoda, the new novel. And I was in the middle of something. I didn't want to really start reading it. So, but you know how it is. When you have a book in your hand, you can't just keep it away. So I was just looking at it. It was, the cover and the smell and the blurb. And then I made the mistake of reading the prologue and I couldn't stop it. And that's how powerful Kiran Nagarkar's prose is. And it took me a day and a half to read the book. But I think it is something that is, it was so wonderful. And I knew that at that time I was going to talk to him. So today we will have a conversation not just on Jasoda, which is, which I'm sure some of you have seen or read, but also on his journey as a writer. And he is one of those few writers who can write fiction in more than one language. And there are many people who write fiction in one language and non-fiction in another, especially many Indian writers writing in Indian languages. But Kiran has been able to write fiction in two languages, and there are really very few writers who can do that. Shall we start with the two worlds that you inhabit, Marathi and English? And your first novel was published in Marathi. And how did it happen? Why did you start writing in Marathi in the first place?
This is going to be slightly autobiographical, so please forgive me, but I really would like to kind of elaborate as to why there was this accident called Kiran Nagarkar in Marathi and the discovery of my own mother tongue. I am from Maharashtra, Mumbai, of course. And the first 4 years of my schooling were in a Marathi school. But that was the end of Marathi for me. For various reasons that I don't want to go into just now, I was asked to, my parents took me to Pune and put me in an English medium school. And from then on, I stayed with English to the extent that when I went to college and did my master's, I did it entirely in English. But that is the academic record of, and the academic record is abysmal of Kiran Nagarkar, but we won't go into how fantastically well I did. But there is something else that happened. When you go to an English school, and especially post-independence, but I suspect that maybe things are even worse today. If you went to an English medium school and you began to speak English, then without your ever being doing this consciously, you had the feeling that you never walked on the earth unless there was at least, you always walked 6 or maybe 1 foot above the earth because you had English. What more could you ask for from life? And over the years, then I joined St. Xavier's College in Bombay, and I found that I had risen further in life. I was above everybody else. Actually, it occurred to me that since I spoke English, I had fallen from heaven. And there was always a halo around my head. I go to Pune, and all the students in Ferguson College, almost entirely in that class, were Maharashtrians. And one professor asked, are there any newcomers? And I stood up, because that's what I was supposed to do. And he said, where do you come from? And I said, I'm from Bombay. And then he asked, from which college? I said, St. Xavier's. That was the end of any kind of relationship with the students in my class. I was the English-speaking bugger, and they were going to teach me a lesson. For an entire year, they never had any converse with me. it was a lonely business, as it is when you change colleges or schools. It's, for some time, you're quite on your own. But the one thing that happened at that time was that, luckily for me, the college had a library, and a very fine library. And so the only company that I had for the first time in my life was books. Every morning after college hours, I would go to the library, to the basement. There are two things here that I would like to point out. One is that if you went to in those days, I believe things had changed radically. If you went to the library in Ferguson College, to the basement, every now and then you'd open a book, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak would have his signature there. I mean, I'm talking about, for those of you who are very young or not from India, we're talking about the great reformers and freedom fighters of India. I mean, imagine you open a book, and on the last page, there is that, very, very tawdry white piece of paper on which whoever has borrowed the book, the signature is there. And sometimes it was Agarkar, sometimes it was Paranspe. I mean, all these, for me, were just names at one time. And now I was actually touching the books that they had borrowed. And this was, I don't know, it did something to me. I mean, imagine, Gandhiji's teacher, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, I'm reading the same book that he must have been reading because his signature was there. And these were my formative years for the simple reason that by mistake, I borrowed a book. Did I understand what I was doing? I don't think so at all. But I borrowed the double, 2-volume Life of Johnson by Dr. Johnson by, who's the biographer of the guy? Oh, God. Boswell. I mean, I keep asking myself today, hey, what was I doing it for? Did I know who Johnson was? Was I trying to show off as usual? I really don't know. But I talk about the Boswell book primarily because when I started writing Cuckold, which again was a total accident, what happened was that I had to decide what kind of language I was going to use. And what came back to me was the number of times Boswell is sitting with Dr. Johnson, in cafes. And Edmund Burke is there, Goldsmith is there, and when Goldsmith is not there, Dr. Johnson and the rest of them are making such terrific fun of Goldsmith. So they were sitting in coffee houses as we sat in Pune, and they spoke a contemporary language. So this was something that I suspect had stayed deep behind in my mind, so that when I wrote Cuckold, without even thinking about it, I thought the people from the 16th century spoke their language, which was very kind of common parlance at that time. So why would I want to write an archaic language suggesting that they spoke in an archaic language? Since Dr. Johnson and people spoke their normal English, which perhaps today sounds very old-fashioned, I decided that I was going to write Cuckold entirely in current lingo, that I would not use any slang. But these were very important things. And there was something else about Dr. Johnson that hit me very hard. Do you remember? I mean, all of you know that this is unbelievable that one man manages to write the entire dictionary of English on his own and is able to give the references of the use of a word every time it was used. The French required, what did the French do? They had a whole committee to do their dictionary. But Johnson did it entirely on his own. And then there was one time when after his dictionary was published, I recall one woman asking Dr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson, I mean, her voice was heavy with emotion and absolutely awe. At the same time, there was some disturbance there. And she said, you wrote this entire dictionary, but how could you get the meaning of the word pastern wrong? I mean, just think of this. Dr. Johnson is 6'6" perhaps. He's huge, and he is an overbearing figure. I mean, good Lord. The man really, I would not dare to utter a word. And there he comes up. Sheer ignorance, madam, sheer ignorance. I mean, can you look at all of us. I mean, we are so full of our own shit. And there is Dr. Johnson coming up with a straightforward answer, ignorance. So he made a mistake, that's it. And there was no problem admitting that he had made a mistake. In the current climate that we live in, please understand, I only make mistakes, but the people at the top and the entire gang of our rulers, they never make a mistake. They are never wrong. They have a dispensation given by God Himself. So you know that I come from the lowest of the low, and they come from the highest of the high. It's a long answer, please forgive me.
It was a very long answer, but I think I will ask that question again. Why did you write in Marathi?
This man is going to expose me entirely. Okay. As I told you, English, I thought, well, boy, you speak English, you may be something else. I finished my bachelor's, then I come and start doing my master's. And by chance, I had come to know Dilip Chitre. And they were, Dilip and his wife and his son were also, I mean, despite the fact that Dilip was such a well-known and amazing writer, they were very poor. I also was extremely poor. So I was very glad when I went to Dilip's house, and sometimes Dilip's wife said, will you have dinner? Hoping that I would say, no, I have had my dinner. And I invariably said, no, I think I will have dinner. But one night, Dilip said to me that, Kiran, his father used to run a terrific magazine, which had fallen on very hard days. My father's asked me to edit the next issue of Abhiruchi, that was the name of the magazine. This is all that he said to me. I came back home that night. I wrote my first short story in Marathi. We're talking about a gap of, I don't know, at least 18 years. I had not had any real contact with my own mother tongue. I come back home, I write this short story. It's really a short story. And to this day, I have to apologize for saying this, but I'm not ashamed of it. And the next day, I start writing my novel in Marathi. It was a completely thoughtless decision, because if I had thought for 2 minutes, as I've said in the new edition of 7 Sixes of 43, I would never have ventured to write in Marathi. But the product is there. My Marathi people from Maharashtra, the majority of them, what shall I say, they butchered the novel, and they said such wonderful things about Kiran Nagarkar. Kiran, as you perhaps know, means the ray of light. So they said, now Kiran av Suryatsa. His name is a ray of light, but the bloody bugger thinks he is the sun himself. So it just went on and on and on. They just would not let go of me. But I was very lucky that I had two gurus, not godmen, genuine, absolutely amazingly enlightened people. Of course, very much in the Gandhian and Nehruvian way of life. So they supported me right through. And the fact that the publisher decided to publish the book itself was a major feat. And I am in the Guinness Book of Records, as you know, for having sold 1,000 books in 27 years. And there is a small footnote at the bottom of it which says the rumor is that the author bought all the copies. Hasre sale, hasre.
Really, this reminds me of an incident which Girish Karnad told me, that why he started writing in Kannada, because he wanted to be a poet in English. And he never thought he would ever write in Kannada. And he was on his way to Oxford when he visited his brother in Nagpur, and he fell ill. And he had to stay there for over a week. And during the time, he wrote his first play in Kannada. And he still doesn't know why it came out in Kannada. And really, what you said is something, there is some mystery about it. And that connection with the language. Yeah.
I just want to say one other thing. I've not been blessed too often by God, but this was one of the greatest blessings that I have received. It just completely changed my view of language. I understood for the first time that any language is a treasure trove. It's got the history of that entire people in it. And I began to think of how the Old Testament begins, I mean, in the beginning was the Word. And of course, I always distort it. But for me, the Word really is God, And I think of India as one of the luckiest countries in the world. We have 24 languages. If only we were able to bring up our children, if they just knew that, oh, my father or mother, God, they have this incredible sexual, philosophical, every kind of relationship with the language, how will they not pick it up? How will they not speak 4 languages? I am so damn poverty-stricken. I can barely speak 2 languages well. Hindi I manage because I watch Hindi movies, and speak appallingly. But that's all that I know. I don't know a single South Indian language. I don't know Bangla, nothing. But I have decided at the age of 76 to have many children now, and each one of them will learn 36 languages.
I'll ask you only one more question about the language. You started writing Ravan and Eddie in Marathi, and then you finished it in English, or moved over to English. Why did you do that?
Actually, after writing 7 6 43, Sat Sakkam Trechais in Marathi, I had begun to write a play which is called Bedtime Story in Marathi, and it's the same name in English. And it was written I started writing it before the emergency started, because I was deeply annoyed with myself for being so ignorant. I did not know, as Ananthamurthy would know, that Ho Chi Minh and Vietnam had a democratic elections. We survived on Time and Newsweek. So the crap that they dished out was absolutely biblical truth for us. So when I started writing Bedtime Story, it was to tell myself that my ignorance was my responsibility. And the theme of the play is anything that you do, anything that happens anywhere in the world, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Libya or Yemen, or in that very, very far away country called India, you and I are responsible. And I wrote this play by taking 4 episodes from the Mahabharata, and I tried to turn them, on their heads. The unfortunate part was that Marathi still has, unlike Karnataka, a censor board.
Karnataka doesn't have.
Doesn't have.
No.
That's what I said, yeah. So they were very lucky. I would have been very lucky if I had written in Kannada. So from day one, even Dr. Lagu, who was a very famous director and actor, called all the experimental groups together in Bombay and said, this is a play that has to be done. It's going to be very difficult to do it, but we have to do it. And by the next morning, the censor board had come out. And don't forget, there are two types of censorships in India, legal and extra-legal. And the extra-legal guys are the ones that won out ultimately, because they threatened the producer, the director, and of course, whoever that author was. So the fate of the play has been terrible. It took 38 years to be published, even though Oxford had asked me 4 times to please give it to them, and every time they backed out. And as you're well aware, the precondition of censorship is that the play or the book is never read. It's only because you're so ignorant about it that you can be confidently say that this is a terrible book. You know, the Ayatollah has to be informed about it or whatever.
See, these kinds of constraint, has it affected your creative imagination?
Not in the books that I have written, but, you know, at that time, one of the things that I thought perhaps I could do was to write about Shivaji or about Subhash Chandra Bose, because they're such controversial figures. And you're right. Self-censorship came into play immediately. You try and write and you know, the sad part is that there's a Sena, as you're well aware, in Maharashtra called Shiv Sena, and its cousin Maharashtra Navanirman Sena. The really remarkable thing about both these parties is that they have not the vaguest idea what Shivaji was about. I mean, historically, let's just say, ignorant beyond words. But they are the ones who tell you what you can write and what you can't. So there's no point. Because Shivaji is an extremely interesting king. And I was very lucky to have a professor who opened my mind towards these, you know, some of them heroes who are not really heroes, some of them who are mistaken, whose careers have been based on false beliefs. But I did not write them. I am planning to write now, and my new book is called Padmavata.
See, many of your novels depict the other. You know, there is either they are set in some other period, or they talk about you know, the protagonists are of a different religion, etc., etc. So there is always, you have taken up this challenge of you know, writing about the other, which means that at the time of writing, you give up the comfort of what comes you know, naturally, or what a writer can take for granted if he or she is writing about the contemporary life or details. Why did you do that, and what kind of challenges did you face when you do this? Because it's I feel it is very important, because it's not easy. It is really very difficult.
No, and this applies especially to my book, God the Soldier, because as you know, the protagonist and his family is entirely Muslim, but they are a very, very enlightened, liberated Muslim family. But the younger son, Zia, turns out to be a fanatic, because his aunt has innocently told him that, you know, a lot of people are leaving our fold, or they're not behaving as they're expected to. So you will be the wali. You'll bring them back to religion. And Zia has a very literal mind. So this is one time when I had a very, very difficult task in front of me. I would like to tell you how incredibly I failed time and time again. I had published Cuckold, and you know, it took, let me not go into my usual put myself down mode, but Cuckold took a long time to just take off. It took 3 years for it to be even known. But I had the feeling that would ultimately win some kind of sympathy. With Zia, it was never going to be the case. And my initial way of looking at it was that I thought, okay, this book is going to be grim beyond words. It is going to deal with extremely important subjects, but I have to make it readable and I have to make Zia likable in some ways or the other. So what I went and did about Zia was that the first 4 or 5 drafts, Zia, who is this incredibly totally focused zealot and terrorist, I gave him another side. I thought he would have wonderful, really very, very ribald sexual episodes. I didn't want him to be entirely dislikable. By the time I was done with my 4th draft, I had realized that I was being a complete ass. There was no question of Zia being that way. And then, so almost all the women went out of the book. Zia's, the women who were supposed to have a ball with Zia, they had to walk out. It hurt me no end, but then the book became far more serious, really. And I think, Vivek, you know, very often the book is mistaken for how should I put it? You know, that it's a book about terrorists. Yes, Zia does go through a terrorist phase. But I think what is missed out is that Zia is an extremist. Yeah?
I think that makes so much of difference.
Yes.
You know, how you look at it. And that term that you use is very important.
Because, you know, I mean, and I don't know whether have we all of us forgotten this, that in the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, there were all those remarkable people, even, I mean, I'm not even talking about Hemingway and others, but, you know, Dos Passos and other people who were there and who were absolutely hardcore Marxists. But the moment the Civil War, of course, it ended very badly, and they were totally disillusioned, and they took the route to exactly the other opposite. They turned into extreme right-wing people. And this is what I thought Zia's career is about. And you know, I had luckily seen a BBC documentary about those terrorists who came back with a terrible guilty conscience to Britain. And in the case of Zia, he's in a bind. He murders by the hundreds, I suspect. But the point is that at some point in time, he begins to think, I can't do this. I can't make my life so full of blood. And every time the thought occurs to him, he knows that he's betraying his God. Because why is he killing people? Why, I mean, in that sense, why are Taliban or the ISIS killing people? It's for their God. And so Zia has this humongous problem. He can't bear to kill people. He is on, without his colleagues knowing it, he has to take pills non-stop to try and pick up the courage to murder people. And he has to keep on doing it because how can he betray his own God? So then there is his assistant who betrays him, not because, I mean, the assistant loves him, the deputy loves him, but he realizes the dilemma that Zia is confronted with, and that is why he betrays him.
You talked about a failure, you know, sometime back in connection with this. What for you is a failure? I'm sure it is not the sales of a book or anything. It's as a writer. What do you see? You know, how do you deal with it? And first of all, what is your definition of failure?
I guess failure will be in the context of whichever book you're talking about. You know, my feeling about my own failure, apropos God Will Soldier, is that I don't know where I went wrong, that I was not able to communicate with my audience in India. Abroad, I seem to be able to have done that. But, you know, the life of someone who is so devoted to God, and yet the devotion shows only as a totally murderous streak, because God, according to their lives, God demands it. I thought this was for me, it was an extremely important subject, and tragically, it has turned out to be worldwide a phenomenon that just does not cease. So I thought the book would do well here, but obviously I had done something wrong that the book did. Okay, it was a grim book, but it didn't have much of a response here. And also one thing, because I have Kabir in it. I reimagined Kabir. That's where I first reimagined Kabir. And for me, the Kabir sections are really, I think there's something which would sum up my own way of looking at life. There is, if you recall, Kabir goes to heaven and God sends him back. Because Kabir, when God tells him that, we are all merciful and compassionate, Kabir is absolutely delighted. And he feels for the first time that this is the God that he has always worshipped and desired. So then he says that, so then everybody will be allowed in, isn't it? Not just the worms and the weevils, but the villains and everybody you will embrace them. And God says, are you kidding? You know that there's a law here. We only take those who have stuck to the book. Now, which book I really don't know. And that is when Kabir says to God in my book, I think I'll go back. And he does come back. And when he comes back, God is furious with him. He has been very nice to him. And when Kabir comes back, he tells one of his disciples. The disciples have been fighting about whether to bury Kabir or whether to put him on a pyre and light the pyre. And then Kabir says to them, he is arisen again. There is only one God, and her name is life. She's the only one worthy of worship. All else is irrelevant. And for me, I don't know, what would I not do to make my Indian brothers and sisters understand that this is not a bad sentiment to live with, That God has life, and not as Muhammad, the Prophet or whatever. But obviously, I am not of this world.
See, Mumbai is so much part of you. It's there everywhere, in your works, and it's like oxygen. When it is there, you take it for granted. Only when it is not there, you feel the presence of it. And it is there in Ravan and Eddie's trilogy, everywhere, right? And for a writer, there is a city like this. I imagine your Mumbai is a Mumbai in your mind. There was a famous Kannada writer called Yashwant Chittal who lived all his life in Mumbai and wrote about Mumbai. And once he made a comment, it's very interesting. He said that the places that appear in my novel, Mulund and Ketwadi and Dadar, it is such a coincidence they also exist in reality. So it is really the place in your mind. So your Mumbai of your mind. Now, is it constant? Is it growing? And how is it affected by the reality?
To answer your question, because there are many answers here. One of them, Bombay is growing. I have submitted a very, very solid proposal to the government that since you are now building 70-storied and maybe even 100-storied buildings, and some of them called Trump Towers, I have a flat at Trump House on the top floor, okay? And Trump visits me off and on. But, there is a problem about space. And this is where I came in very heavily and told them how we could utilize space. I said, why do we need roads? Let's build on the roads themselves, high rises on roads so that nobody can move in Bombay. And that I will make available another, 100 square miles of, or whatever it is, of space. And the government has accepted my proposal. There'll be no roads in Bombay. You don't have to worry at all. Either you come by helicopter and you drop down, or you stay out, Hey, too bad. And what did you say? Children have to play? Are you kidding? They're always playing video games. They're very nice.
So the city of your, again, I'll go back to the same question of your, of your mind. Like for example, in Ravan and Eddie, it is spread over 20 years, and has that city changed in your novel, or is it something that I'm trying to explore the relationship with that city of your inner life, where what Bombay meant to you. What is that Bombay for you, which is in your novels? Forget about the Trump Towers.
No, you're right. No, Bombay has over the period changed in my work also, because Bombay, as you're well aware, is Bollywood, right? And I really don't know whether you would agree with this, but for us, our own lives are completely irrelevant. We are Indians. We live our lives through the movie stars and their movies and their gossip. And if Bombay is a genuine portrait of this, you can imagine what happens in down south. I mean, down south, people commit suicide. When MGR had his kidney operation, they didn't wait to see whether he recovered. They had already started committing suicides. So in that sense, I was very disappointed that when Jayalalitha died, there were no suicides. So, is this real love or not? You think about it. But Bombay is Bollywood. And the majority of Bombayites, when they are very young, I think at least 80% of them, they think that they would like to get into the movies. The problem is, of course, there is only room for a few. Then what do? One of the ways of getting into movies for women is to get into these, initiated by Trump, these beauty contests. And that's one method of doing it. There is also one method of doing it. The other method is for men to show that they are very beautiful, and the notion of acting and beauty has been redefined in India. It has been completely reinvented because muscle is acting. I have now, last 7 years, I have gone to the gym. I'm building up muscles. I'm told I'm not supposed to open my shirt here. But I have no acting talent at all, but I have got muscle. And that is known as acting in India. So Bollywood truly is it's not even a kind of figure on the fringes. It is an absolute reality in Bombay and in India. Have you seen any TV channel which does not have, the news will invariably end with something about some author, some actor or something. Author? On a TV channel? Hey, come on, man. Be realistic. But, take Padukone or whatever. There are a lot of other things. I mean, my all-time hero, of course, is Salman Khan, So this is the Bombay. And I thought, why will my heroes, my chawl dwellers, these two boys, Ravan and Eddie. Eddie has always wanted to go to Hollywood. His hero is Elvis Presley. But even Eddie, and for me this was very important because when the Catholics came to, the Catholics did not watch Hindi movies for a very long time, the Catholics from Goa. But you know, they blended into the fabric of the city, and now you find not only directors, but actresses coming up from the Catholic fold. So I have Ravan and Eddie getting into the movies.
Let's talk about Jasoda. Uh, See, you said that you started this 20 years ago, and then you abandoned her, and then you went back to her. And it took some time for you to, get familiar with her and come back. It's always, what happens is for a writer, when you start writing something, certain things look very important at that point in time. And when you look back on the, at the same theme or what you have written over a period of time, sometimes, you are surprised and you are very happy with yourself. But there are times when you are very disappointed with yourself. What is the story with Yashoda? And how did it all take shape?
You know, I have been asked this question that why is it that I write, even in Ravan and Eddie, where the women, at least their mothers, don't have such major roles. But they are the sole supports of the family. And I've been asked, why is it that my women come across as much stronger than the men? That why am I so deeply committed to the women? Because the fact of the matter is, women are definitely stronger than the men. The men come and go. What is happening in Punjab, again, I don't want to talk about it just now, but in Bombay itself, when the mills stopped functioning, or when the men discovered liquor, because there was prohibition, who looked after the family? It was always the women. When you read Oscar Lewis, and I know that Oscar Lewis has gone through a very, completely people in abroad seem to have got some kind of knife into him for reasons that are totally, I don't want to get into this. But Oscar Lewis, who came to India and studied poor families and went to Mexico and other places and studied poor families. And what do you find? He talks about the culture of poverty. And the culture of poverty is entirely supported by the women folk. All the hardships are taken by the women. And I've been asked, what made you think in these terms? I'm always puzzled by this question because, God, don't you see what is going on in front of your eyes? When we marry someone, we're doing a huge, big favor to them. You know that, right? We might sleep with them, we might beat them, but we are doing a huge favor to them. And never forget it. Because otherwise, how come we are, I'm not even talking about the carps in the north. But look at what we saw just now for this movie that got into so much trouble. The women are, forget the men making their lives impossible. They're talking about committing Johar themselves. What is with us? Instead of the women saying to themselves, we are not going to be victims of these damned men, they're talking about going and burning themselves. And I remember a friend of mine asking me one simple question. Have you put your finger just for 30 seconds on a flame of a candle? You know what they did in Maharashtra, right? You had to have these drums. When they got somebody to go into the sati thing, of course the woman screamed her head out, but it was important to knock the sound out. So there were these incredible drums beating all the time. So Jasoda in that sense was something which came from I don't know, she must have been with me for much longer than 20 years, And the fact that you get married, and then you've already taken the dowry, and then you tell her parents and her, no, this is not enough. I'm looking after you, you know. So it's an expensive proposition. You better cough up more. So I find this very, very problematic. And Jasoda, for me, you look at all the epics, and you know, whether it is the Mahabharata, Ramayana, of course, and the fantastic Iliad and Odyssey, the heroes are always the menfolk. But I find very often it is the heroines who are amazing.
It's home is one of the themes of Jasoda, because it starts and there's so many things that you the novel explores, and also the other thing is violence. You really push it to the extreme to make it a point, and at some point in time we realize that you are also suggesting that the violence is getting normalized. Is getting normalized. As a reader, because when you start seeing so much and you gradually increase it, like how we see many the right-wing politicians look like saint today, right? So it is like that. It is like when you in comparison with some people. So is that what you are trying to say, that how we gradually get used to violence and start accepting it?
I've been very fortunate. Yesterday also I talked to Vivek, and I've been very fortunate to have him in conversation, really. He makes extremely valid points, and it's true. What he said just now is so damn true, unfortunately, that you normalize it. It becomes perfectly fine, what is going on, that with the treatment of the women. And yes, I don't deny that. I mean, I was going to read, there's no time, one short passage I think I was going to read. But yes, Jasoda kills children, kills the girl child. And she, in that sense, you could say she is a murderer. But don't forget who pushes them to do this. It is not the women. The women come into play when it's the when they become the mothers-in-law. Because then they also become party to the burning or to the torture of the daughter-in-law.
I'll just make a point before I request you to read, is that in your works, like for example, Ravan and Eddie, and even in Jasoda, the book starts with a powerful metaphor, and it doesn't leave us. And I really congratulate you for that, because that is something, like in Ravan and Eddie, that leap, it is there at the back of the mind all through 3 books. It doesn't leave you. But that image, that same here in Jasoda, and it is so wonderful. And thank you for that. And can I please request you to read a passage or two from this new book?
I would be more than happy. Jasoda takes only 9 hours to finish reading, okay? So you'll be here for 9 hours, am I right? Yeah? Count yourself lucky. Cuckold takes 3.5 days. I'll just read the prologue.
Yeah.
Okay?
I am always intrigued by people who ask for the summary of the book. If a writer could actually summarize, he wouldn't have written the book. He would have written only those 2 paragraphs.
Okay, I'll try and do it as fast as possible. This is the prologue to Jasoda. Can you hear me at the back? Is it all right? Okay. Jasoda did not know how much time it would take. Barely a quarter of the field had been done. The rest would have to wait. She untied the plough and let the oxen off. Home, she said, as she slapped Ram, the older of the 2, on his bony rump. Go home. It flicked its tail to get rid of some of the flies, but didn't move. Home. I said, go home. The pain was getting unbearable. She walked unseeing, her foot stumbling in a furrow or coming up short against the edge of the upturned earth. The air rasped in her ear. She looked up. The sky was as colorless as the sun. In the distance, the heat was turning her firstborn son, Himmat, and the dead people tree to vapor. She heard the tinkle of bells. The oxen had followed her. She took off her ghagra and lay down with her head resting on the long, exposed root of the tree. Himmat played with the string of her skirt. Before he could pull it right out, she snatched it from his hands, tied the two ends of the string, and gave it back to him. She had been through her own and other women's deliveries before, and she knew there was no trick to them. The child would come when it felt like it, when the time was right. Her eyes were level with the furrows, and she could see where the earth had been unyielding. A couple of hands away from her, large red ants wove in and out to the cloths, carrying back with them the crumbs of the bajra rotis she had had for lunch 2 hours ago. She drew her legs up. There was no pattern or rhythm to the pain yet. When it twisted her, she picked up the dry, stony lumps of earth and crushed them to powder. The roots and ground under her were wet with her sweat. Himmat climbed over her and tried to get at her nipple. She ignored him. The baby was stuck just behind the mouth of her vagina. Her son was screaming now and forcing the edge of her blouse up. She slid her breast out and he held it in his hands. He had to work hard to get at the milk. Another couple of days and he would have plenty. The head slipped out. The neck was easy. Himmat had moved to the other nipple. The shoulders should have slid out by now, but there must have been some obstruction. She waited a while, then held the baby's head in her hands and tried to force it out. Lakhan, the younger ox, was already licking the sticky bits of placenta that had dropped from the baby. Her hand slipped. She pushed hard. Her breath choked and she gagged. Her vagina tore open. She could not see the newborn yet. Its shoulders were working their way out. Putting her weight on the palms of her hands, she raised herself against the trunk of the peepal tree. The crusty bark raked the flesh of her naked back. She lay still, her eyes shut to tamp down the burning and the laceration. Himmat's hand had strayed over to the baby's navel and was pulling at the umbilical cord. His arm obstructed her view. She disengaged it and thrust Himmat aside. The newborn baby made swift progress. Now she could see its sex. She brought her knees a little closer. The child rested between her thighs. Her legs and little feet would soon be out. Jasoda tightened her anal muscles. She squeezed her thighs together very hard till her face swelled and the veins in her temples bulged out. She did not let go till the girl was still.
We have some time for questions now. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Nagarkar and Vivek. You made some reference to women coming into play after they become mothers-in-law. Now, the very well-known sociologist M.N. Srinivas said that the mother-in-law was also a part of the patriarchy, and the only time that she could express her power was with the daughter-in-law. So what do you have to say on that?
I request you to read this. Answers are here. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I can't possibly argue with the rationale behind the behavior of the older women. But for God's sake, they have also gone through the same thing, doesn't it? Which reaffirms one of my, it's a statement that I repeat all the time, and I feel terrible contempt for myself for doing it. The only thing that experience teaches us is to make the same mistakes again. You know?
Good morning, sirs. Actually, my question is sort of to add up on that question only, that in India is very much recognized for gender violence. But like the lady said, that in India, women cannot come together to fight against it. In several occasions, they are themselves party to it. Like the case you said about the Johor, there's some certain women in Rajasthan are saying they'll do it, and the mother-in-law's role in domestic violence cases, like the Supreme Court rather recently also amended a particular act to make them party to it as well. So why is it, what is stopping in India from women to actually coming together to fight that cause? Why are they fighting within when especially all of them have gone through those same process mostly? So I know it's sort of similar to hers, but please, if you can shed some light to it. Thank you.
Have you noticed something? When do the men come together? I mean, when Mr. Trump decided that all the foreign men, most of the foreign Muslim countries would not be allowed to send their folks across, absolutely astoundingly, hundreds of thousands of Americans, especially women, got together. They got lawyers there to the airport. They were there right through, backing the people who wanted to come in. What has happened to us? We have, if I'm not mistaken, a government that cannot stand dissent, that does not even have any notion of our history. Are the men and the women coming together? Are the men doing anything? We had something when Pehlu Khan or Akhlaq was murdered. But you know, it was raining in Bombay. I believe in Delhi there might have been 2,000 or 3,000 people who got together. In Bombay there were 200 or 300. Bombay has 29 million people. Did we get together? So you're absolutely right about the women. And I don't know why it is. And you know, we've got the strength. Let's never forget that the one man and the whole gang that the Congress was, and I mean the word gang in a very, very happy sense. I'm talking about Gandhiji. How come he got hundreds of thousands of people together and we can't get 100,000? There's something, because primarily, of course, we have decided that Gandhiji, I beg your pardon, who's that? Are you talking about somebody from Yemen? This is how we are responding to the situation. We have decided to knock Gandhi off, because if we at least bring him back to life, there's a chance that we might think, hey, we can follow his example. I mean, Nehru, Gandhiji, and God knows how many others. I'm not even talking about the terrific leaders. I'm just talking about the common men who spent years and years in prison. And for what? For a non-violent freedom struggle. How come we can't do that? So then, you know, there are lots of women here. You are here. Can we do this? Can we show America that when we see something wonderful happening there, we have no problem being Me Too?
We have time for one more quick question. Yeah.
So, according to me, the true success of a writer is when he's true to his inner voice and he's able to articulate it well and with truth. So how come you are counting yourself as a failure as far as the readership goes?
I don't think he said he's a failure. I want him to respond.
My failure was in a particular context. You know, I was talking about God Will Soldier and the fact that my audiences have not, or Indians have not been able to grasp the colossal centrality of the problem of extremism and zealotry. I've been writing again and again, we have not been putting any money into the education of the Muslims. Of course, the same holds absolutely for the Dalits. But do we realize what we are doing? I mean, 8 years ago, we have a garden in front of our house. I mean, it's about 2 buildings away, okay? 8 years ago, there was not a single woman there who wore a black burqa. Now you cannot imagine. They come with their boyfriends or with their fiancés on motorbikes, and they are in the black burqas. And you know, every time I see it, I feel, hey, come on, breathe the air, lady. look around, and what are your damned menfolk doing? But this is going to keep rising because our government does not realize, don't educate them, don't take them as human beings, and what is going to happen is exactly what Saudi Arabia is doing, pouring money, Salafi money, into Bombay and other places. And if you're going to maltreat Muslims or anybody else, you're going to have the ISIS phenomenon everywhere in the world. Turkey just now is fighting those Kurds, and America suddenly has discovered, oh, now they are not on our sides. So, either we decide that we are going to embrace them and never leave them and put in money, we are going to create more and more enemies. And take my word for it, this government doesn't seem to understand it. They are not going to be Gandhiji's non-violent brigade.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I should learn to keep my anger. I haven't done
A big round of applause again for Kiran Nagarkar, Vivek Shanbhag for this lovely session. Thank you for being here.